a group of tourists mocked a new guy on Royal Guard duty, pushing him to his breaking point with insults about fake soldiers and costume wearers. But when he finally spoke, revealing his combat medals and battlefield heroism, their arrogance shattered instantly. Here's how a decorated war veteran taught them the true meaning of a uniform. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Also, make sure to check out our second channel, Guard Patrol, linked in the pinned comments, because we upload daily at the same time on both channels. So subscribe to both and never miss a powerful story. The summer sun beat down on the paved courtyard of Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the ancient stones as tourists gathered in eager clusters, cameras raised and voices humming with excitement. Among the sea of visitors, Sergeant Michael Townend stood at his post, a perfect statue dressed in the iconic scarlet tunic and bearskin cap that had become synonymous with British tradition. Though this was only his third day as a royal guard, his posture betrayed nothing of his newness. Back ramrod, straight shoulders, square chin, level eyes fixed forward in unwavering discipline. At 28, Townend cut an impressive figure. 6 years in the British Army had honed his body into a weapon, while his mind carried the weight of experiences most civilians couldn't comprehend. The medals hidden beneath his ceremonial uniform told stories of courage under fire, of split-second decisions that saved lives, of nights spent beneath Afghan stars listening to the distant thunder of artillery. But here in the heart of London, that life seemed a world away. Look at that one. A voice cut through the general murmur of the crowd. He's new, doesn't even have the stance. Quite right. Michael didn't flinch, didn't even allow his eyes to track the source of the comment, though he could see the speaker. In his peripheral vision, a tall man with expensive sunglasses perched on his carefully styled hair, designer clothes that seemed to announce his wealth to anyone paying attention. Blake Thompson, though Townend didn't know his name, yet was pointing directly at him, surrounded by 3 friends who laughed too loudly at his observation. Bet I can make this one crack, Blake continued, his American accent carrying across the courtyard. The new ones always break first. Townend remained motionless, his focus unwavering despite the commentary. He had endured Taliban gunfire in Helmand province. A tourist's taunts were hardly worth the energy of a reaction. Still, something in the man's tone, the casual arrogance, the assumption of superiority, sent a familiar tension through Townsend's shoulders. He had encountered men like this before in other contexts, men who viewed others as entertainment obstacles or props in their personal narratives. A young family edged away from Blake's group, the mother pulling her children closer as she sensed a brewing confrontation. An elderly couple exchanged concerned glances, a man's hand tightening on his walking stick as if preparing to intervene, but most of the tourists simply pretended not to notice, their eyes carefully avoiding the scene, while their ears strained to catch every word. Seriously, Blake's voice grew louder, clearly intended for Townend to hear. What's with the fuzzy hats? They look ridiculous, like something from a costume shop. His friends snickered, one of them raising his phone to start recording. Townend could see the red light blinking in his peripheral vision. Another social media moment in the making, another attempt to provoke a reaction for likes and shares behind his mask of military discipline. Townend sighed internally. It wasn't his first encounter with disrespectful tourists, and it certainly wouldn't be his last. The commanders had warned all new guards about this particular hazard of the job. They'll try make you laugh, make you flinch, make you speak. Captain Williams had said during orientation, remember, you're not just a man in that moment, you're the living embodiment of centuries of tradition. So Townend stood unmoving, as stone as Blake Thompson took another step closer, his expensive cologne wafting through the summer air. In the distance, a tour guide was explaining the history of the palace to an attentive group, her voice rising and falling with practiced cadence. Children chased pigeons across the courtyard. Life continued its normal rhythm around them, but Townend could feel the peculiar tension that precedes conflict, the subtle shift in the atmosphere when someone decides to make trouble. Blake Thompson smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches eyes, and stepped directly into Townsend's line of sight. Hey, toy soldier, he said, snapping his fingers inches from Townsend's face. Anyone home? And so began another test of Townsend's discipline. Behind his impassive expression, memories of far greater challenges flickered through his mind. Sand-filled bunkers and night patrols through hostile villages, the weight of a wounded comrade across his shoulders. If those hadn't broken him, this man certainly wouldn't. What Blake didn't know, what none of the gathered tourists could possibly guess, was exactly who stood before them, hidden in plain sight beneath the ceremonial uniform of the Royal Guard. Blake wasn't just any tourist. He was entitled enough to believe that the world existed for his amusement. This wasn't their first performance in Paris. They had mocked a street mime until he Broke character in Rome, they pose inappropriately with ancient statues. Their YouTube channel had amassed a following of viewers who delighted in watching boundaries being pushed to remember the tomb of the unknown soldier, chuckled Ryan, adjusting his designer sunglasses. Those guards couldn't take a joke. Either Blake smirked, brushing an invisible speck from his $5,000 jacket. His father's hedge fund had made certain that consequences were. Something that happened to other people Josh knew to the group glanced around uncomfortably. Maybe we should just check out the changing of the guard and move on. He suggested, boring Blake. Cut him off. We didn't fly all the way to London to follow some tourist checklist. What's more authentic than these palace puppets? An elderly American couple nearby exchanged disapproving glances. Blake noticed and deliberately raised his voice. I mean, what century are we in? Grown men playing dress-up while taxpayers foot the bill. Blake positioned himself directly in front of Townsend, blocking visitors' photos. Do you think they're selected based on how dumb they look in these hats? Or is it whoever can stand still the longest without having to be a young boy tug at his mother's sleeve? Why are they being mean to the guard, mommy? The mother pulled her son closer. Because some people never learn proper manners, darling. Blake turned, fixing her with a cold stare. Proper manners, like wasting money on outdated traditions, like pretending these guys are soldiers instead of tourist attractions. Two elderly men in blazers adorned with military pins exchanged glances from the edge of the crowd, their expressions darkening with disapproval as Blake played to the cameras now pointed in his direction. What do you say, guys? Should we see if we can get the statue to move? Blake sauntered close to Towns, and his movements deliberately exaggerated for his audience. Pulling out his phone, he held it inches from the guard's face, snapping a selfie with a flash on #London, #PPalacePuppet. He announced, typing with theatrical flourish, caption, found this animatronic soldier at Buckingham Palace. The artificial intelligence needs work. Though doesn't even blink. His friends laughed on cue. Though Josh's chuckle sounded forced, the crowd had grown, forming a loose semicircle around the spectacle. Most wore expressions of discomfort, but few intervened. The peculiar paralysis of public confrontation keeping them silent observers. I read online that these guards are actually forbidden to react. Blake continued addressing the crowd as if giving an impromptu lecture, apparently the Queen or King, whatever value ceremony, over basic human dignity. How very British a woman in the crowd cleared her throat. That's not true at all, she said, her local accent evident. The guards maintained discipline because they're actual soldiers representing actual soldiers. Blake interrupted, his voice dripping with mock surprise. So they let just anyone into the military these days? I thought soldiers were supposed to, do something. Ryan stepped forward, joining the performance. Maybe their battlefield experience involves fighting off tourists with cameras, he suggested, prompting scattered laughter from a few onlookers throughout this Sergeant Towns, and remained perfectly still. His gaze fixed on a point in the distance. Years of military discipline had taught him to compartmentalize, to acknowledge discomfort without surrendering to it behind his impassive expression. He was cataloging every insult, every invasion of his space, his mind doing what it had been trained to do: observe, analyze, remain operational under pressure. The two elderly veterans had moved closer, now their decorated blazers identifying them as more than casual observers. The taller one leaned heavily on a walking stick, his weathered face set in lines of controlled anger. Remember when we weren't allowed to speak? Either George, he murmured to his companion, just loud enough for nearby listeners. Helmont Province 09 radio silence for 72 hours. While we waited for extraction, his friend nodded grimly. These boys have no idea who they mocking. Blake, oblivious to the veteran's comments, escalated the performance. He handed his phone to Ethan and struck a series of ridiculous poses beside Towns, and saluting incorrectly, standing at exaggerated attention, pretending to adjust the guard's bare skin cap without actually touching it. Maybe they're not allowed to speak because they don't know how. Blake suggested loudly, like those guards at Buckingham Palace. What are they called? The kink mutes. Queen's guard corrected a tour guide from the edge of the crowd, her professional smile strained. Queen, King, whatever. Blake waved dismissively. If they're real soldiers, I'm the Duke of Cambridge. A young girl in the crowd tugged at her father's sleeve. Daddy, why is the man being so rude to the soldier? The father bent down to his daughter's level. Because some people think being unkind makes them important. Sweetheart, Cart. Blake overheard and turned, fixing the father with a cold stare. Or maybe some people think asking real questions is more valuable than blind worship of outdated traditions. He gestured dramatically at Towns. And this whole setup, the funny hats, the red coats, the no talking rule, it's all designed to make tourists like you and are over nothing. Josh shifted uncomfortably behind Blake. Maybe we should move on. he suggested again, glancing at the increasingly hostile crowd. Check out the Tower of London, or something not yet, Blake replied, without turning around. I think our friend here is starting to crack. Look at his I did it just twitch in reality. Sergeant Townsend stood as immobile as ever his training, creating a wall between Blake's provocations and any visible reaction. This wasn't his first encounter with disrespect, though it was perhaps the most public in his mind. He ran through breathing exercises learned during special operations training, controlling his heart rate, maintaining optimal functioning despite the stress. I bet they're not even allowed bathroom breaks, Blake continued, circling towns and, like a predator, probably wear adult diapers under those fancy uniforms. Is that true, guard? Blink once for yes, twice for no. The comment drew uncomfortable laughter from a few tourists and looks of outright disgust from others. The atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as a spectacle was becoming a confrontation, with bystanders increasingly taking sides rather than simply watching. You know what I think, Blake announced, moving directly into Townsend's line of sight. I think the reason these guards don't talk is because they got nothing worth saying. Failed soldiers, right? The ones who couldn't hack in actual combat. This statement sent a ripple through the crowd. The veterans exchanged glances, their expressions darkening. My brothers in the army, a teenage boy called out, his voice cracking slightly. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan. You don't know what you're talking about, Blake turned toward the voice, his smile never faltering. And I'm sure your brother does something useful, this guy. He jerked a thumb toward Towns and professional mannequin, the royal family's lawn ornament. The boy's father pulled his son away with a disgusted backward glance at Blake. Others in the crowd were losing patience. Show some respect, called a middle-aged woman with an Australian accent. You're a guest in this country. I paid for my plane ticket, Blake shot back. That gives me the right to ask why taxpayers fund this medieval cosplay. Ethan zoomed his camera in on Townsend's face. Maybe he's not responding because he doesn't understand. Do these guards have to pass intelligence tests or just stand still? Competitions, Ryan snickered. Seriously, imagine this being your career. What do you do for a living? Oh, I stand perfectly still while tourists take selfies. Real warrior material. Right there, Town. And remain immobile, though a subtle tension had appeared in his jaw, imperceptible to most, but a clear sign of restraint to trained eyes behind his disciplined exterior. Memories flickered the weight of a wounded comrade across his shoulders. The metallic taste of fear during an ambush outside. Kandahar. Blake stepped close to Towns, and he was now inches from the guard's face, close enough that his breath fogged the brass buttons of the scarlet tunic. I got a theory. He announced they hire these guys because they're too incompetent for actual military service. The real soldiers are out doing important work, while the washouts get fancy hats and toy rifles. A cold silence fell over the crowd. Josh took a half step backward, distancing himself from the scene. The taller veteran gripped his walking stick tighter. That's enough, he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. Despite his age, you've had your fun at the expense of serving soldier. Time to move along. Blake barely glanced at the old man. Serving soldier, please, if standing still is military service, then my guardian gnome deserves a medal. The crowd's mood shifted palpably. A tour guide quietly ushered her group away from the scene. Parents shielded their children from the increasingly hostile exchange. Is it true they recruit these guards from failed acting schools? Blake asked loudly, because the whole not reacting thing seems more like bad theater than military discipline. Throughout this barrage, Townsend maintained his composure, though the insult struck closer to home than the tourists could possibly know. The discipline that kept him motionless wasn't ceremonial. It was forged in battlefield necessity, in situations where the slightest movement could mean death. Blake circled Towns, and like a shark, ladies and gentlemen, he announced, what we have here is the famous British discipline. Or is it just fear of breaking the rules, fear of thinking for yourself? He moved closer. I wonder what they do if you actually move. Fire you, court-martial you for scratching your nose. Blake pretended to inspect the guard's uniform. Look at these buttons, all polished for what, so tourists can take photos. The crowd had grown larger, reactions divided between disgust and reluctant fascination. A mother hurried her children away, muttering about disrespectful Americans. See, the real soldier would say something by now. Blake continued. A real soldier would defend himself, his uniform, his honor. But this guy is just playing dress up. The veterans had moved in front of the crowd. The taller one stepped forward. Young man, you need to stop this. That uniform deserves your respect. Blake turned, sizing up the old man with a smirk. Another costume enthusiast. I see. Let me guess, you also played soldier once upon a time. Fought in the Falkland. The veteran replied evenly, and I recognize disrespect when I see it. Respect is earned. Blake shot back, and standing like a statue doesn't earn anything except maybe a sore back. A young boy tugged his father's sleeve. Dad, Why is that man being so mean? The father's response carried clearly. Because some people mistake cruelty for courage, son Blake scoffed. Courage you want to talk about, courage, real courage, is on battlefields, not palace gardens. These ceremonial guards wouldn't last a day in actual combat. Townsend remained motionless, though a muscle in his jaw had tightened, imperceptibly behind his disciplined exterior. His mind calculated and observed. I think we should go now, Josh suggested, touching Blake's arm. We've made our point. Blake shrugged him off. Not until I get a reaction. Everyone has a breaking point. He leaned in close at Towns, and even fake soldiers like you, you know what the difference is between you and a real soldier. Blake asked, his voice carrying across the now silent courtyard. Real soldiers actually face danger real soldiers make. Sacrifices real soldiers don't hide behind ceremony. When people challenge them, the veterans exchange glances, a silent communication born of shared experience. The shorter one nodded slightly, as if granting permission for what might come next. I bet you've never even heard a shot fired in anger. Blake continued, his face inches from Towns. Ends never had to make a life or death decision, never had to carry a wounded comrade to safety. Each word struck with precision, though not in the way Blake intended, for behind the impassive mask of the Royal Guard, Sergeant Michael Townend carried memories that would have silenced his tormentor instantly had they been known, memories of dust-filled firefights in Helmand Province, of night operations that left him sweating through nightmares years later, medals earned not through ceremony, but blood. That uniform might impress tourists, Blake pressed on, but to anyone who understands real courage, you're just playing pretend a toy soldier for the royal families. Entertainment. Something shifted in the atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable. Those closest to Townsend noticed at first an imperceptible change in his breathing, a newly focused quality to his gaze, not breaking discipline, not yet, but preparation. What's wrong, guard? Truth hurts. Blake's voice dripped with mockery. Or are you just following orders like a good little soldier, standing here letting an American walk all over your so-called dignity because someone with braids on their shoulder told you to? The taller veteran stepped forward, his voice cutting to the tension. That's more than enough, son. Blake turned, irritation flashing across his face. Stay out of this, Grandpa. This is between me and the statue here. No, the veteran replied evenly. It's between you and every person who's ever worn that uniform with honor, including me. Blake rolled his eyes dramatically. Honor? Please, what's honorable about being a tourist attraction? What's honorable about standing still while people mock you to your face? He turned back to Townsend, delivering what he thought would be his final insult. Real soldiers fight for something. Real soldiers stand for something. You're just hiding behind tradition because you couldn't cut it where it actually matters. It was a word, hiding, that did it. After everything else, the insults about courage, about service, about worth, it was the accusation of hiding that finally crossed the line. Sergeant Michael Townend moved. The movement was precise, controlled, economical, not the reaction of someone losing control, but of someone making a calculated decision. He took one step forward, coming to attention not in the ceremonial posture of the Royal Guard, but in the crisp noon stance of a combat veteran. Sergeant Michael Townend, formerly of the 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment. He stated, his voice clear, and carrying 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, distinguished service, cross-recipient for actions under enemy fire in Helmand Province, 2018. The courtyard fell completely silent. Blake's mouth opened, then closed. No clever retort forthcoming. I've carried wounded men through gunfire, made life or death decisions under impossible conditions, and buried friends who gave everything for the uniform. Your mocking Townsend words were measure precise, without a hint of the anger that would have been justified. And now I stand here not because I couldn't cut elsewhere, but because I consider an honor to represent centuries of tradition and sacrifice. Blake took an involuntary step backward, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in the face of authentic authority. The veterans nodded in silent approval, recognizing control power in Townsend's stance. The men and women who wear this uniform, Townsend continued, are all combat veterans. Many have seen action in the world's most dangerous regions. We stand guard not because we're being soldiers, but because we've earned the right to represent something greater than ourselves. This uniform, Townsend continued, his voice steady but powerful, isn't a costume. It's a symbol of service that spans centuries. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the children, sensing the gravity of the moment, Blake stood frozen. His earlier confidence evaporated under Townsend's unwavering gaze. In Helmand Province, Townsend said my patrol was ambushed. I carried my wounded captain 2 miles to extraction under enemy fire. The medal they gave me sits in a drawer because the real reward was bringing everyone home. Alive, he gestured to the palace behind him. I stand here not because I couldn't handle combat, but because after seeing the worst humanity offers, I chose to represent its best traditions. A taller veteran stepped forward, nodding in recognition. Royal Marines for Oakland's campaign. He introduced himself, and my friend here was Edis. We know exactly what that uniform means. Son Blake's friends had back away, embarrassment written across their faces. Ethan had lowered his camera. The recording stopped. Ryan studied his expensive shoes, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Josh had already retreated to the edge of the crowd. Blake began his voice. Uncharacteristically small. I didn't know you were actually, that's the point. Town and interrupted, not unkindly. You made assumptions based on what you saw on the surface. A ceremonial uniform doesn't mean ceremonial service. The second veteran stepped forward. The Queen's Guard isn't some tourist attraction, young man. It's a posting of honor given to soldiers who've proven themselves in the field. Every man standing guard has earned their place. Through blood and sacrifice, a ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd as this information registered. Many tourists looked at the other guards with new eyes, suddenly seeing not ceremonial figures, but combat veterans continuing their service in a different form. The discipline you mock towns and continued isn't about blindly following orders. It's about honoring those who came before us, those who stand beside us, and those who will come after. Something I suspect you know very little about. Blake's face had reneged his expensive sunglasses now clutched nervously in his hands. The crowd's attention had shifted. They weren't watching for entertainment anymore, but witnessing a moment of genuine education. Each button on this tunic town, Zen gestured his uniform, each crease, each detail, is maintained perfectly, not because we're afraid of punishment, but because precision and discipline are what kept us alive in combat. What you call playing dress-up is actually honoring a code that saved lives. A young girl pushed forward through crowd, looking up at Townend with wide eyes. Did you really save your friends in the war? She asked. Townend's expression softened as he looked down at her. I did my job, just like everyone else wearing this uniform. We look out for each other. Are you a hero? The girl pressed. No, Towns replied gently. The heroes are the ones who didn't come home. I'm just someone who tries to live up to their example. The girl's mother approached, taking her daughter's hand. Thank you for your service, she said quietly, and for your patience today. Others in the crowd began to echo the sentiment, murmuring thanks and apologies. Some glared pointedly at Blake, who seemed to shrink with each passing moment. I think the taller veteran said, addressing Blake directly, you owe this soldier an apology. Blake shifted uncomfortably, the weight of dozens of judgmental stares pressing down on him. His carefully constructed persona of confident provocateur had crumbled, leaving only an embarrassed young man who had severely misjudged his target. I began, then clear his throat. I apologize. I didn't understand what the uniform represented. Townend nodded once, accepting the apology. Without commentary, his face had returned to its professional mask, though not with the ceremonial blankness of before. This was a controlled expression of a soldier who had said what needed saying, and nothing more. Perhaps next time, Townsend suggested quietly, you might consider that traditions endure for reasons beyond your immediate understanding. The veterans exchanged approving glances. The taller one stepped forward again, addressing the crowd rather than, and just Blake, what you witnessed today is the character that makes these guards special, not just their discipline in remaining silent, but their dignity. When finally speaking, Blake backed away, his friends already retreating toward the palace gates. Their camera was off now, the day's entertainment having taken an unexpected and humbling turn. Josh lingered behind momentarily, offering a separate, seemingly genuine apology before hurrying after his friends. Finally, as the courtyard returned to its normal rhythm, town and resumed his pose. His posture was perfect, his expression discipline, his bearing exactly as it had been before Blake's interruption. But the atmosphere had changed. Tourists now gave him a respectful distance. Children pointed with newfound, or rather than curiosity, and parents explained in hushed voices what they had learned about the guards. What would you have done? If you had witnessed these boys disrespecting a royal guard, would you have stepped in or stayed silent? Let us know in the comment below. And if this story taught you something new about the royal guards, hit that like button and share it with someone who might appreciate this perspective. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden depth behind familiar traditions. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Check out our other videos, appear ing on screen now. And we'll see you tomorrow at the same time with a brand new story.